Near the beginning of this year, I ranked the most annoying bosses in gaming, which were aggravating, but you could conceivably beat the first time. Now it's for the opposite end of the spectrum, while maintaining all the frustration. These are the bosses that steal entire afternoons away from you. The kind that, try as you might, you just can't seem to win. And more often than not, it's because the game has some sort of cheap attack that it constantly spams. Even if these fights have a proper solution, it's extremely unintuitive and you gotta go way out of your way to figure it out. Also, given how fighting games are overflowing with cheap bosses, I feel like I should save those for another time. Oh yeah, there will be optional bosses here. Being avoidable doesn't excuse them from being atrociously designed, especially when they stick out so much compared to every other boss in their respective games. Golden rule of this list: when you finally win against them, it feels less like you earned your victory and more like the game randomly decided you had enough. Bosses are a tricky thing to call BS. Most of the time, they're intentionally designed to be massive damage sponges that can easily nuke you if you're not careful. It takes a really big mistake to make one of these guys test your patience more than they should. Or you have really dumb teammates. Get out of the fire, you fucking moron! Borderlands 2, like a lot of multiplayer games, has one of these bosses. While most of this game's invincible raid bosses are extremely difficult to take down conventionally, enough pointing and shooting is gonna kill most things with this game's guns, with one ever so glaring exception. Master Kean, come on down! You're the next contestant on today's episode of Why Did They Design the Boss This Way? Hiding out in the Oasis-turned-sand pirate base of Hater's Folly, Master Kean serves as one of two super bosses added in Borderlands 2's first DLC. And where Hyperius is actually pretty decently designed, Master Kean is about the biggest miss this game has to offer. So for any other boss, any other enemy in this game, the solution is pretty simple. You shoot the enemy, and their health goes down. Do it enough times, and congrats, you've committed murder. He, however, decided, taking damage from gunfire? Not for me, I'm too good to be damaged conventionally. Shoot him, throw grenades, do anything, and his health isn't moving an inch. So how do you damage Master Kean if doing what you do in literally any other scenario doesn't work? Well, you see those pet sandworms of his that pop out of the ground periodically? Well, when you kill them, they leave behind these toxic puddles that sap away your health. But if you somehow get the idea to lead Guy over these puddles, then he finally decides to take damage. I think the problem here is pretty self-evident. Why is this how you damage him? In what world does this make sense to do when nowhere in the game prior or after is this the solution to killing a boss? What's worse is if you don't lead Guy over the puddle in time, it'll stay there permanently. And if you leave enough puddles around, basically the entire floor is gonna start sapping your health, let alone the RPG shots that Guy shoots. Killing Guy this way takes forever, and it's the only way to beat him unless you want to glitch the fight and kill him with the door. But even then, his drops aren't even any good compared to Hyperius, who is miles easier, more conventional, and more sensible with his boss fight and has actual drops worth your time. There's absolutely no reason you should try and farm Guy. Master Guy the Invincible is an absolute wreck of a boss fight, but being a raid boss, at least you don't have to fight him unless you really, really want to, which realistically, you don't. You can just ignore the guy and let him sit alone with his sandworms forever and you won't miss anything. Can't say the same about everything else on this list, unfortunately. So, Kingdom Hearts, anyone? Let me guess, are we talking about Wargoyle or young Xehanort from Dream Drop Distance? Actually, no, but we are still doing Dream Drop Distance. Gosh, I have complicated feelings on this game. There's one boss towards the end of Riku's story that you probably forgot about. Mostly because it was so traumatic that you subconsciously blocked it from memory. The anti-black coat nightmare confronts you when you finally meet up with Sora, and despite being a surprise boss, he has some nasty tricks. He spends most of the fight running away into the dark background, sending ranged attacks at Riku. Some of these attacks can grab him and do a lot of damage, but they are too hard to dodge, especially if you have Riku's upgraded one. But, considering most of the field is covered by a thick layer of darkness, it's hard to see the attacks even coming. The one attack you have to be careful of is his Shadow Steel, because if it hits you, well...
Suck him dry!
Oh yeah, it will drain your health, and in the worst situation, can almost fully heal this actual nightmare. Plus, its range is insane and somehow even harder to dodge than his other attacks, despite being way worse. One of my raiders beat Triple D on critical twice without Balloon, and this was the boss that gave him the most trouble. Oh, did I forget to mention that this is the first fight in a 3-boss gauntlet? Because right after, you have 2 fights against Ansem. While not as hard, make you refight the whole thing if you lose. It made another writer overgrind Riku to cheese these fights because he'd rather do that than suffer through these on critical. At least with Gargoyle as Sora, you can spam the super broken links, and Balloon just carries you either way. Doesn't make this fight less annoying or BS. Hey, get it? That's the list. Next entry. As we approach the modern age of gaming, we see a handful of successful indie games that hit so many positive check marks. It really feels like a lot of the biggest indie devs around care a lot about delivering an experience that culminates all the things we love when playing a game. But then Team Cherry steps in and says, nah, fuck it. Let's shove a janky boss into our otherwise solid game and ruin whatever good experience people had with it. After all, nothing screams personality more than a gamer screams of seething impotent rage! Zote is a wandering traveler on a path seeking fame and glory. He starts off as a charming, bumbling idiot who's a mouthful, but otherwise harmless. That is, until you rescue him more than enough times and find out he's been making up lies to steal your biggest fan from you. Speaking of whom, Rota grows so fascinated by Zote's stories that she begins writing it all down to the point where you can traverse her dream and face Grey Prince Zote, a fantasized version of Zote who is much stronger than Zote himself, unsurprisingly. When you first fight him, he's not that bad. He moves relatively slowly and doesn't have that many attacks, but the more you come back to fight him, his attacks get progressively faster, hit harder, and become more varied. Now, sure, this boss can get pretty absurd, but you don't need to fight him, so it's not a big deal, right? Yeah, about that. To complete the Godmaster content, you have to go through all 4 of his main pantheons. Each of them features all the bosses you fought up to this point. And in the 3rd pantheon, you face Grey Prince Zote as the 7th opponent. He is scaled up to be as difficult as his level 3 to level 4 fight. It sucks! Zote moves stupidly fast, erratically changing the trajectory of his jumps, and even teleporting on top of you. Even when you stagger him, he doesn't stay down long enough for you to breathe or heal. Oh, and staying out of range won't help you either, because this egomaniac can spawn Zotelings to chase you down or explode at you. Not to mention, every single time he drops it to the ground, he keeps spawning freaking shockwaves! If this is your first time doing Godmaster, you're gonna get stuck here for a while. This guy is not only harder than the actual final boss of the 3rd Pantheon, but arguably even more so than Base Radiance and Pure Vessel. I'm not even kidding. At least those 2 can be staggered long enough for you to take a breather. This guy? Rules don't apply to him. He's literally a bad fanfiction brought to life. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, hey, just don't rescue him. You won't have to fight him then. Okay, does anyone know about that first time playing? And even if you do, would you tell someone else playing that they can do that? Of course not. If Team Cherry's gonna be a bunch of sadists, then so are the fans. Not to mention, once you get this late in the game, it's already too late to back away unless you replay the whole game again just to get back here. I saved this arrogant asshole 3 times. And this is the thanks I get?
Don't be a hero.
don't save Zote, you do get to skip fighting him altogether in Godmaster. Doesn't even matter to the completion rate. At least the game has the mercy to not cheat you out of that knowledge. And as a compensation bonus, you can find the heavily obscured Eternal Ordeal challenge and embrace the leisure of mowing down as many Zotes as possible. Assuming you could put up with all this grunting. I get trying to make us hate a character and all, but this is reaching South Park levels of spite. Makes me wonder if Zote is actually based on someone the people at Team Cherry really friggin' hated. I'm kinda bummed that Frontiers came out months after Sonic Month because it's honestly earned a spot in my top 10 all-time favorite games. The writing was great, the gameplay was solid, a blast, it looked amazing, and it treated the universe with so much care and respect. I think my only real issue is the combat is a little shallow compared to other beat-em-ups. Of course, that's just a small critique compared to one battle that'll make you rip your hair out. Wyvern is an enormous dragon robot and one of the titans of the Starfall Islands. It was created by the ancients and woken up to kill Sonic because...
You could not understand.
But what I do understand is he's got your last Chaos Emerald, so you gotta snuff the tragic dragon. This fight is actually my favorite boss fight in the game. You chase the slinking titan on a floating laser carpet, then grab the Chaos Emerald, go supersonic, and start flying all around the island, dodging missiles, lasers, and slashes, and you can parry them back at him to leave him vulnerable to damage. Ah, it's so adrenaline pumping and fun! And they ruined it! In the final Horizon DLC of Master King Coco's Trial, you get a rematch with Wyvern, and he's much less forgiving this second time around. Now, you absolutely have to parry Wyvern's attacks, or you'll be stuck in an endless loop where it doesn't take any damage, and you basically have to burn through your ring supply until game over. The problem, you have to be stupidly precise with your parrying, or it won't work. And every time you miss and a missile hits you, it launches you back, causing a short cutscene and wasting time. Time you absolutely do not have. It wouldn't be so bad if you didn't have such a limited amount of rings, not just for this brawl, but for the whole frickin' trial! Once again, I love Frontiers to death, but having a boss fight punishing you for not having the most pinpoint accuracy in redirecting an attack feels a little underhanded. You want to know how bad it is? Wyvern is the one rematch in the DLC that forced me to switch from hard to easy just to beat it. And if you have to do that yourself, don't feel any shame in it, because otherwise you can say goodbye to all the blood vessels you burst trying to properly wipe out a flying metal danger noodle. Remember in my last countdown when I made a jab at FNAF Security Breach for having bugs and glitches? Well, now we get to talk about one of the most broken parts of the game, the final boss of the true ending, William Afton. The first thing to note about Afton is that, well, you barely fight him. Instead, he'll wander through 3 different rooms and attempt to reprogram Freddy against you. His boss fight takes us back to the classic FNAF, as we have to find which room he's in on the monitors and hit the green button next to the corresponding one to burn him up. Again, because that totally worked last time, right? You can't kill it with fire, and I really wish I could. That makes me sad. Now, this may sound easy, but Afton is a bloody coward, and throughout the fight, he throws every animatronic in the game at you. In the first phase of the fight, you have to deal with the rest of Freddy's band of glam rock animatronics. Chica and Monty are pretty straightforward. You have to listen for Freddy to warn you that they're coming, and then close the corresponding door. Except Chica will hobble down one of the corridors, making you so you have to check down both of them, which is tedious and time-consuming. Monty, on the other hand, will try coming in through the vents like John McClane. But then you get to Roxy. She is stupidly fast, and the doors will not work on her, so Freddy will instead tell you to hide. Spoiler alert, this is a massive lie. Sure, you're supposed to hide inside Freddy, but every time you climb into him and try to face Roxy, he runs out of battery almost instantaneously. Then he has to go inside his charging pod, leaving you out in the open for Roxy to jump you. Yeah, don't even try to cheese your way through Roxy by hiding behind the bed, because regardless of how you hide, it's not guaranteed that she'll leave the room right away. Now you're stuck waiting for Glamrock Luna over here to find her way out of the office, and Luck, Freddy's been corrupted by Afton.
Time to die.
If you're lucky enough to get past all of that, there's still a second phase to the fight. Now the animatronic blob you saw when you first walked down here will try to grab you with its tentacles, and now you have to be incredibly careful not to run into them as you sneak very slowly toward the monitors. Okay, whose bright idea was it to add stealth missions to FNAF? And even if this phase isn't as blatantly unfair as the first, there's still the possible chance that the game will just randomly revert back to phase 1 for no reason at all. Then you have to redo the most broken part of this fight because, your pain is funny. The problem with this fight is that it would probably be doable if the security breach wasn't so broken. But the glitches and luck-based elements make it almost as hard as 420 mode from FNAF 1. And anyone masochistic enough to attempt either knows that you need to get extremely lucky and you will die over and over and over and over again. Honestly, compare Markiplier's reaction to beating FNAF 1's 420 mode.
Oh my god! Oh, I did it! I did it!
With his reaction to beating Afton's fight in Security Breach.
Oh.
The proof is in the pudding. So let's talk about one of Monster Hunter's black dragons. No, not Fatalis. We'd be scraping the bottom of the barrel if we talk about him again. Wait, where are y'all going? Why else isn't out for another 3 months?
I have surrounded my house in a moat of grass.
There aren't many black dragons, but as we saw with the big guy, they're even more of a walking calamity than even the normal Elder Dragon. So the fact that World gave us the option to fight 2 of them was insane. Too bad the other one we got was Alatran. So, I heard you guys like DPS checks. Time limits for those DPS checks. Elemental weakness changes that prevent you from getting those DPS checks. And a forced loss if you miss said DPS checks.
That's never going to happen. Ever, 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 ever in a million years. Ever.
Well, gee whiz, folks. Alatran will ruin your day. Yeah, all of those happen. The whole goal of Alatran is to do enough elemental damage to him to weaken his supernova to a point where you can barely survive it with a full HP bar and some jerky. And that's to survive him. Never mind killing the dang thing. Alatran switches between 3 elemental forms: fire, ice, and dragon. And you need to hit the weaknesses of fire and ice to hit that DPS check effectively. So if it's fire, you should have all ice weapons to hit that check ASAP. Don't worry, that shower thought in the back of your head does happen. If it goes to the opposite element, it becomes immune to the previous weakness, so no elemental damage for you. It switches between the elements every 3 minutes or so, and Dragon does come between the opposite forces. Dragon mode lets you do damage to Alatran's horn, which, on break, forces Alatran to go back to the previous element. That way, you can keep hitting the original weakness and not die from Eschaton Judgment, the aforementioned supernova. So, if he starts in fire, attack him with ice. He goes into Dragon mode, you break the horn. Then he goes back to fire instead of moving to ice. Because if he goes to ice, those ice weapons will do normal damage but won't do jack for that DPS check. Repeat until dead. Simple, right?
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong.
Combine that with a lack of ability to go back to camp unless you die, poor hitboxes to run him into walls, and having access to all elemental blights, including one that nullifies elemental damage, and you have a seriously unfair fight. Oh, and the horn only breaks twice, and in Dragon mode only. So you need to hit that DPS check multiple times, since he will use that supernova every 7 minutes. So it isn't the mission clock you need to worry about this time around. It's the number of times you can survive a nuke before not even tasty jerky can save you. Good luck, dear hunters, and I hope this guy doesn't come back in wilds. I miss Fatalis. Ah yes, Mike Tyson, Iron Mike himself. His iconic status as an untouched champion in the boxing ring is definitely not unheard of by Nintendo. So much so that it's only brilliant for them to slap his name onto Punch-Out and make him a hilariously unfair boss. Of course, the fad eventually died out for reasons, and they slapped in some fictional nobody as the final boss, while still keeping the same unfair mechanics. Either way, the BS difficulty is here to stay and has remained one of the most talked about difficult bosses to date. Tyson is legendary for his ridiculous flurry of one-hit KO punches and high stun resistance that made him a Sisyphus-level challenge to knock down. Even if you somehow manage to get him knocked out once, the nightmare isn't over. Mike eventually changes his fighting style to a series of fast jabs telegraphed very faintly through his winks. At least, you better hope he does, since sometimes he forgoes that entirely. Oh yeah, and good luck surviving that blinky flurry. It's only fair that any normal player would find this boss beyond rigged. He alternates between these overpowered punches so much that it feels practically RNG. But believe it or not, there is a way to tell how Mike Tyson fights and when he would switch out his style. It all comes down to the timer. In round 1, Tyson will change from a series of one-shot uppercuts to the wink jabs once the timer reaches 130. In round 2, he remains invulnerable and kicks off with a series of fast jabs until the timer reaches 040, where he goes back to his usual punches. And once you get to 130 again, that's where you gotta worry about the blinking flurry. And at 230, he'll either do it again or do 2 jabs and an uppercut. Once you get to round 3, all you gotta worry about is the flurry at 130, and the rest is history. Between all of this, you gotta hit him at the back of the head for maximum damage, know when to block his jabs, and dodge to get him vulnerable. Toughen through all of it until you tire him enough that you can finally stun him for longer than 2 punches. With a concrete strategy in mind, mastering the Mike Tyson fight still takes a vicious level of dedication to time each punch and dodge accordingly. It's made with every intention to be a BS fight tailored for the most hardcore games out there. Nevertheless, if you have the strength to push through, you'll see that at the end of the day, the champion is still human. And that couldn't be more true, considering the actual Mike Tyson never did beat himself in the game either. Such is the case when the finger must be mightier than the fist. Y'all thought Punch-Out could be too much? That game really only has one super grueling part. Ninja Gaiden, on the other hand, has earned a reputation as NES's most brutal. And it shows. The villain of the game, Jakio, is more than just a typical power-hungry demon worshiper. He has a repertoire of BS to back it all up. To start with, this guy had Ryu's father captured and brainwashed into his knight. You fight him in the first phase of the final battle, and his fight is frankly not that bad if you have some projectiles to spare. Once you're through with that, Ryu's father regains consciousness just in time to protect Ryu from Jakio's death blow. Fueled with the taste for vengeance, Ryu challenges the Mad Sorcerer in the second phase of the finale. And this freaking fight. It looks simple at first. Just dodge the fireballs, climb the walls, hit the boss. But these flames actively home in on you and will never stop until they leave the screen. If you dodge poorly, just even once, it can completely screw you over for the entire fight. Doesn't help that you have to wait for just the right time when you can hit Jakio without having to worry about an incoming fireball. But the icing on the cake, the real reason this fight is this high on the list is what happens if you lose. You get sent back to the beginning of stage 6. Not one route before the boss, not the beginning of the last substage, but all the way from 6-1.
Oh, we were right there, man!
And all 3 substages are not easy. You got a crap ton of falcons, disc throwers, and bottomless pits mauling your entire path. You go through all of that just to fight the boss again and probably still lose because you don't have enough time to learn his pattern. Oh yeah, and your health doesn't replenish at the start of the fight if you lose once, by the way. Say what you will about Mike Tyson, at least you can input a code to refight him again at any time. Between his freaky appearance and painful battle, Jakio really encapsulates evil to its bitter core. While the final battles in the sequels also have their own series of BSery, none of them came close to how much of a punch in the gut this boss turned out to be in comparison. Thankfully, after all that, the third phase against the Demon Lord isn't that tough. Just mash your way to victory while sidestepping once in a while. It's almost like a reward for putting up with all the crap beforehand. Bosses in the Soulsborne games have carved themselves into a brutal yet effective niche. Carefully dodge and counter the attacks of giant monsters who can end you in a maximum of 3 hits. It's a formula that lends itself to plenty of memorable encounters, which you've probably figured out given how many of them have been on the other boss lists. And then there's Bed of Chaos.
Jesus, we're going in hard! Strap in!
At first, it looks completely harmless. Just destroy the 2 orbs, then attack the core. If only it was that simple. For once you take out one of the orbs, the difficulty goes from non-existent to agonizing. Its hands have insane range, do a ridiculous amount of damage, and push you around like a rag doll. And while all that's happening, a bunch of bottomless pits open up all around the arena. And that's just a warm-up compared to the absolute agony of trying to jump onto the root. For added pain, Bed of Chaos has one of the longest boss walks in the entire game, in one of the most annoying areas. Yes, there is a cheese strat against it, but using it is effectively mandatory if you want to win with your sanity intact. To put this into perspective, one of my writer's friends beat this game in around 8 hours. Half of his deaths were to this boss. Oh, and a fun fact, there's an unused version of this boss that appeared to be far less infuriating. Mercifully, you are granted some leeway with the Bed of Chaos. It's the only boss fight in the game that has built-in checkpoints. You can also find a hidden bonfire much closer to it to help with the backtracking. Which is more than I can say about number 1. Climax, Mega Man 6. Turns out you can actually damage him with the blade armor. But who would figure that out the first time? Silver, Sonic 06. Did you know that all you needed to do was attack him when he jumps? There, saved y'all 18 years of agony. Jasper Bat Jr., No More Heroes 2. If there's a character Kean should disintegrate. Tower Power Pokey, Sticker Star. Either get a home run or get frickin' stamped all over. Imaginary Numbers, Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass. Relies so much on RNG that the developer said, go back and one-shot it later if you don't like it. Veld, Fire Emblem 5. You have to deploy specific units near specific targets in a game where you can't arrange units pre-battle. Yeah, that's fair. Solo Muse, Tales of Shilia. How do you make the solo boss in a Tales game suck? Whitney, Pokemon Gen 2. Oh, everybody hates that cow. That effing cow!
Make sure not to miss a single note or you will fail the full combo. Now here's the ending of the song.
Sonic, just kidding.
Imagine that as a boss fight. I've talked about how Dragon Guard 3 deserves more respect. While I stand by that statement, I won't act like the game is perfect. Specifically, the boss fights aren't great. At best, they get the job done. At worst, they're downright maddening. And oh boy, did they save the worst for last. You know how good final bosses are the ultimate test of everything you've learned throughout the game? Well, Dragon Guard 3 completely throws that out the window. It's a rhythm game, quite possibly the hardest ever created. Throw the Fire on Flames on Expert wishes it could be even a fraction of this controller shattering. While it starts off simple enough, the BS quickly gets cranked up to maximum when the game decides to take control of the camera away from you. And no, there's no way to manually control it here. Oh, and if you thought that was hell, it gets so much worse. Eventually, it progresses to the point where you're forced to just play it completely by ear. You either need to have flawless memorization skills or Terrence Fletcher approved musical timing.
Was I rushing or was I dragging? Count again.
1, 2, 3.
If that wasn't enough, the notes eventually start coming at you in sextuplets. You can't just button mash through them because of how insanely strict the timing is. Oh, and don't even think about putting the controller down when the screen fades to black. There are 2 more notes snuck in at the last minute just to spite you.
Yeah! It's not fair!
Editor here, just to tell you 3 things can be done to minimize the frustration with this boss. Number 1, turn down the background music to prevent overstimulation from the horribly mixed audio. Number 2, use all the face and shoulder buttons to deal with those faster notes because pushing buttons in sequence is often more effective than mashing. Number 3, and this is an important one, keep the subtitles on because the text for Mikhail's second line of dialogue matches perfectly with the final note.
Fun.
But even with these helpful tips and tricks, it's going to be a long process of trial and error. A lot of error. And to make you doubly mad, they lock upgrade materials for extra missions behind the completion of this boss. Anyway, back to the video.
The worst part about all of this is that everything except for the actual fight is perfect. The build-up, flawless. The payoff, beautifully satisfying. The visuals, awe-inspiring. The music, oh, just listen to it. Now, once again, all respect to the man, Yoko Taro humbled himself. While Nier Automata's final boss was also brutal, it didn't actively cheat, and you were actually given help. But for being such an absolute middle finger of a boss fight, The Flower has more than earned its place as number 1. I'm the Fiery Joker, and next time, it's mythical.
Hey everyone, this is Josh. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Please check out my other social media like my Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr. Check out my other channels such as Joshua Burner for reactions and other stuff, Dragon Fighter Gaming for tabletop, and Bob Equestria for cartoons. Consider checking below the video and donating to my Patreon, Streamlabs for my merchandise, or becoming a YouTube member. Thanks for watching.